wells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should remember to sign up when leaving the building after today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed, filmed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, but there may be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room while the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone remember to use the microphones provided when they're speaking, and please switch them off when you have finished speaking. Thank you. Have we got any interest to declare, councillors? Ian Bosher, thank you. Right, we'll go on to the first, item number 3, which is the proposed MF Craneswater Residence Parking Zone. And I think who's going to introduce this? Is that you, Kevin? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg. I was just going to say a little bit about it because both reports on the agenda today concern the MF area, which was identified in the programme of consultation. As a first step, we conducted informal consultation in that area, and the results of the informal consultation are used to identify whether people are in favour of a residence parking zone and also what issues they face. And this helps us design the controls to assist them. We found from that informal consultation that the results in the MF area highlighted that there were 2 different types of issue. The issues in the MF section were concerned with visitors to Canoe Lake, peak parking problems on sunny days, motorhomes, event parking, as well as commercial vehicles parking overnight. The area we proposed, the MD extension, the issues were very similar to those existing in the existing MD zone. Things like displacement, households having too many cars, and too many commercial vehicles parking overnight. And for that reason, we split the MF area of consultation into 2 different traffic regulation orders and consulted. And that's why we have a proposal for the MD extension and a proposal for the MF zone. The split also helps with the with the previous MF boundary. There was a boundary down Waverley Road, and if we'd had that, there would have been a problem across the Waverley Road because there's lots of roads intersecting Waverley Road. Whereas the proposed boundary between the MD extension and the MF zone runs along St Rowlands Road, and there's only one road that intersects that, so it makes a much cleaner boundary. So for those 2 reasons, we split the zones. The formal consultation on both traffic regulation orders was carried out between the 26th of November and the 23rd of December. The normal consultation period is 21 days, but it was extended to 28 days because the period we were consulting in was approaching Christmas. With regard to item 3, the MF zone, as stated in paragraph 5.2 of the report, we received 175 responses. Our assessment of those responses is that 93 of them supported the introduction of the zone and 69 opposed. Of those, 83 in favour lived within the zone and 49 who opposed the zone lived within it. This response level is similar to other consultations we've done on RPZs. So on that basis, the recommendation is to implement the zone with the exception of 47 metres of double yellow line on the north side of Parkside Road. The proposal is to replace this with 41 metres of double yellow line on the south side of Parkside Road. And so there'll be restrictions on either side of Parkside Road, but it'll be split between the north and the south rather than all being on the north. The other recommendation is that no parking bays are implemented on the side of St Helens Parade adjacent to Canoe Lake. The public notice indicated that the whole road would have parking bays, whereas the TRO only proposed them on the side opposite the Canoe Lake. So the recommendation is to do what the TRO proposed and only have them on the side opposite the lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify that the initial survey is the result of residents asking?
Yes. The MF area is on the programme of consultation, which was agreed on September the 6th and was devised as a result of residents' requests, and a progressive programme across the South Sea area, depending on displacement.
Thank you. And the other thing is, can you explain, we have a sort of point system, don't we, for putting areas on a list to be surveyed?
The report on September the 6th talked about a point system for, we were already involved with consulting on residents' parking zones in the South Sea area. The report on the September the 6th said that once we'd finished that or any other stream, the next area would be identified by a point system. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we have some deputies, I think, for MF, I think is first, isn't it? MF. Councillor Matthew Winnington, would you like to come down? And is Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Symes, do you want to make a deputation on this as well?
Yes, I have registered this morning, Chairman.
Yeah, that's fine. And also Mr. Dan Frost and Mr. Stephen Goris, is it Goris? Would you like to have a seat at the table? Matt, if you move down one. Right. What should we go with the? Going. Yes, fine. That's what I'm just checking. Right. Mr. Frost, would you like to start? And you have a maximum of 6 minutes.
The first point really for me was I was concerned, obviously, of the cost implication to begin with. That's the first thing that was like, well, I've got park to pay outside my house, and also the implications of if I ever decide to sell my property, will that reduce the value of my property? And that was the first bit that I was thinking about. Then decided that maybe not everybody realised the importance of this decision that's going to be made. So I literally wrote a bit of a letter up and posted it across the whole area. We just feel that sorry, I'm just out of breath because I just ran all the way from stage to the park. So hopefully I was going to be last, but there we go. Right.
I'm sorry about that.
It's all right, no worries. So from my perspective, I don't think the proposal is not a solution to obviously the parking periods that are within the area. You say the problem is the volume of cars. I can't see how a permit is going to obviously solve this. Providing places for cars to park, whether it be a car parking area or anything, there's lots of spaces around the Portsmouth area, that potentially you could actually look for a solution there. The proposed scheme is not going to guarantee car parking spaces for me. So when you look at it, we park our cars. I work shift work. Between 11 and 12, I'm not there, so it doesn't benefit me in any way. So I understand that. But when it comes to the evening, 6 till 7 in the evening, you can park. I tell you can park your car anywhere in that time. The issue comes from around about 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening when you're coming home, and because of the movement of cars, the road fills up. So that was my first thing, thinking, well, that doesn't benefit me. Then considering the cost of my family, the cost of the car, £150 for a second car, £30 for a first car, and then so on, you then look at, it's a built-up family area, big homes, So I was then thinking, well, if we, not myself included, but other people have children, how many cars they have in their area. And I appreciate we're trying to help the environment by not having as many cars, but realistically people will have cars. There's lots of schemes in place that I've seen where, yes, okay, £150 for the second car, so on, so on. Eventually those schemes get more and more. So London, Birmingham, Manchester, we all of a sudden end up paying, they've researched it, £750 for a permit, so on. So there is, what's the guarantee that these prices are never going to change? And for us, the scheme relies on it being strictly enforced. I walked the area, and just by posting some of the letters, and it was a bit of the area, not the whole area. I was out for 2 hours. Now I'm thinking, well, if there's a scheme in place between an hour and an hour in the evening, how is that going to be enforced? Because unless you're going to create X amount of jobs for traffic wardens and things like that, then I can't see how it will be enforced between 11 and 12 and 6 and 7. It seems an impossible job for however many people you decide to do. I would say you probably need to be looking at about 15 to 20 traffic wardens in that time, because the moment you get one ticket, it probably takes 10 minutes to write a ticket. So that was one of the things we were looking at. And the scheme for me would particularly be detrimental to residents who, like, for example, work shift patterns. There's lots of other options, park and rides and anything really, but for being a resident in the area, I can't see that this is a solution. It's kind of I can understand why people who are maybe down the street that maybe are a little bit older, please don't feel me kind of but it's not for them. And it's one of those areas that's becoming an affordable area for people to move into for younger generation, and it just seems to be holding us back a little bit, and I just don't see how it's going to fix the problem. I understand it's going to be for time to summer, for the beach and for Canoe Lake, and also people wanting to use Victorious, but they're period times, that's a seasonal time. It's not all year, and I don't see why I should have to pay more money to park outside my house, in all due respect. Basically the cost and the need for a solution should be passed to the event and the organisers. So if that's the reason why we're doing it, then let them worry about where they're going to park people. If that's one of the big reasons why, because that's the only time I can't park really in my road is when it's Victorious or something like that. That's the only time. Last night I may have not been able to park directly outside my house, but I was able to park down my road a little bit further down. We don't have the luxury of driveways and things like that, so I don't really understand why we are going down this route, and it just to me feels like a little bit of a money grabbing scheme. There's no benefit for me. I pay my council taxes. Why should I have to pay any more to park outside my house when actually the times that you're proposing has no effect on me, and generally down that road not many other people.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Frost. Mr. Goris.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. I won't repeat what Mr. Frost has said. I oppose this implementation on MF. We live in a very community-driven area. The parking is an issue sometimes, but we live with it. We're neighbours, we get on, we move our cars, we don't park outside our front necessarily, but our neighbours know that if they're away, we'll use their space and so on. So I'm not going to go into a lot of that detail, but Chairman, that is the reality on the ground. The need is not there in this part of the world. I would suggest this is your opportunity to pause this rollout of the parking zones and actually reconsider it on a more holistic basis across the whole island, not just on Craneswater. But specifically for Craneswater, I would say this consultation was flawed from the start. The officers have already explained that it was a 3-week consultation extended to 4 weeks. Well, he forgot to mention, A, that it was through Christmas, but also we had a general election. So there were a lot more people having other bigger, more contentious issues on their minds than actually some of the issues associated with parking. And of course, it's the holiday season. So many parents, particularly in the area that we both live in, were not there. They were away, their children were off on holiday, they take an opportunity to take a break. So I would certainly question that. Another thing I would question is the fact that houses don't own cars. Houses don't drive cars. People do, and this study is all about, and all of the consultations have been about households. How many households do this or that? If you take your numbers of 1995 and the return of 313, I believe, that's actually a 15.4% return, not the 16% in your report. Now, it's only a small number, but if we look at the numbers a little bit more, which is an evidence-based thing, then the reality on the ground is of 313 people. Excuse me, as I'm getting older, I need my glasses more. Only 54% thought it might be helpful. Not that they wanted it, that they thought it may be helpful, which I would suggest supports the views that Mr. Frost has put forward. Many of us don't think it will. They won't want it because it won't actually help. There's no guarantee that with a second car owner, you'll actually get a second permit anyway. But if we take those numbers, 54% of those that responded is only 169 households. That suggests to me, Chairman, that you're going to make a very undemocratic decision should you support your officer's recommendation, because only 3.45%, and I've rounded that up from 3.468, percentage of households actually feel that this will be helpful. That surprisingly small number of people are driving parking zones in an area where many people don't want them. If you go back to the statistics from the first survey, there are many roads where it's very even. Some there might be 5-4, some it might be 4-4, so 4 against, 4 in favour, and so on. So very split. There are some areas where there are particular issues and there are more people in favour, and I would suggest, Chairman, that we need to actually, you need, as the Council, to consider better ways to do this, not just a blanket approach to parking zones across the city. Now, I'm personally against parking zones, but I'm fully in favour of the taxpayer, like myself and Mr. Frost here, having the opportunity to have our words said across the island. Now, if the island decides that it's a right thing to do, then fine, that's fair enough. That's democracy at work. But to say that 3.45% should actually dictate the fact that we have a parking zone in our area, I think that's completely wrong, personally, and I would urge you, as 3 responsible councillors, to not make that decision, to actually pause this process, stop this flawed consultation, and actually listen to what the voters are saying. Listen to what the public are telling you, that yes, there are problems. We generally manage it locally. If my neighbours are having a party, they'll tell us, and we'll take a lovely opportunity to go off and go somewhere else. But imposing a ban like this, with no guarantees that a number of people will get all of the parking zone passes, permits, whatever you wish to call them, is not very good, Chairman. So I would urge you to reject your officer's recommendation in this case. Take stock by all means. Go back to the drawing board. The consultation, I believe, was flawed from the start. I've told you my reasons why. Christmas, general election, holidays is not a good time. I know you as politicians will always get blamed whenever a consultation is done. That's just, I'm afraid, that comes with the job, if you like. But the reality is that was a bad time to do it, and I don't believe that reflected genuinely what's happened. Now, I speak, probably like Mr. Frost, to all our neighbours. We live in a very sociable area, and there's a mix of people. Some do want it, undoubtedly, but many don't want it. And I would like to represent to you, Chairman, that that is what you should be doing, and not supporting this officer recommendation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorris. Councillor Winnington.
Chairman, if we can, just a point of clarification, if we can, for the benefit of Mr. Gorries and others. Councillor Heaney and myself are opposition councillors. We have no say in this decision. The decision rests with Councillor Stagg and Councillor Stagg alone.
Thank you for that clarification, Chairman.
Councillor Winnington.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. I'd like to first say thank you to residents who have come in today. I think it's very good that people get to have their say at the meeting and come and give your opinion. I'd also like to thank the officers for the hard work they've done on this survey. I'd also like to support the recommendation of the officers for this parking zone to be introduced. I think it's a very clear, compared to other parking zones we've had recently in the city, this is a very clear mandate in favour in terms of the people who have responded, and as the parking manager has said, the level of response was in tune, not just with the responses that have come from people in more recent times in this current parking thing, but also under previous responses of where parking zones have been introduced elsewhere in the city since the first one was introduced in 1999. And this, of course, was under administrations of all colours, whether that be Labour, Liberal Democrats, Conservative, and then obviously Lib Dem again. I think it's really important to recognise that when you introduce a parking zone, you get displacement. So that includes going back to that very first one in 1999, and it goes back to those that were introduced further to the west of the proposed MF parking zone, which goes down Clarendon Road and west of there, all the way into Southsea, which were put in the mid-noughties. At that point, displacement happens. At that point, the area on the west side of Victoria Road South was surrounded by parking zones for 14 years and never asked about the displacement that was caused until last September when they got their parking zone put in. And I think that's the really important thing. This is a way of asking people when they have issues, not waiting and waiting and waiting and hope that the issue goes away. And I do obviously understand the point of view from two residents in Benbridge Crescent. So, you have to have a parking zone of a certain size. You can't just have it as a single road or a couple of roads, apart from in extreme circumstances. And therefore, you're always going to get some bits of a proposed parking zones that have some issues and some that don't. But I think this is and it was interesting as well that for Benbridge Crescent, I think it was almost identical, the amount of people who responded who want a parking zone and the amount of people who responded who didn't want a parking zone. I think it was 11-10 or something like that.
6, 9, 4 against. That's very much the way that we should be looking at this. This is the way, Councillor Stagg, that parking zones have been introduced in other urban areas around the country, that it's done in places like Brighton, which is very similar. They work from the seafront back, and I believe they're just about finished now. But it's also done on the principle of consent. No parking zone is being introduced without people saying they want to. And as politicians, we should always be very, very careful about saying about turnout. We have members of our council who get elected on 20% turnout. 16% turnout is not much less than 20%. Some of us get elected on 40% turnout, but we don't question the legitimacy of our colleagues who get elected on a smaller turnout. So, in conclusion, I thank everyone for the report. I thank people for giving their opinions. I think that is important. But at the same time, I think in the end, we have to go by the majority of people who responded to the consultation. They've said they want the parking zone, and therefore I completely think that that is what should happen today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beamington. Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I've got a list of questions and points that people have asked me to raise. I'm going to trundle through those. I wonder if you could respond to these in your remarks via the officers or commit to for the officers to supply me an answer. I mean, the alternative, obviously, I can raise is all at full council is my
Depends how
fallback.
many there are and how long the answers are as to
Well,
whether
I
it exists.
will get to them. So, firstly, I've been asked how many parking tickets have been issued for residents' parking violations in recent years. How many additional wardens have been taken on as a result of the extension of residents' parking? I've been asked about the survey. Because the survey is delivered, it's not through Royal Mail, it is delivered on behalf of the council, and I'm told by residents in flats that they haven't received this because, I think because flats are often difficult to access and so they may not have been delivered to, so could you comment on that? I have been asked about Canoe Lake. This was brought up in some of the introductory remarks, but how are you proposing to manage that? Because if there is no management of it and it's just outside the zone, practice, it will be full up of student cars and works vans and things that never ever move. What about camper vans and how does that fit into everything? Should you have completed a formal survey on this? I've had it said to me, I'm not saying I necessarily endorse this, but I've had it said that this process, because you haven't done the formal survey, it's not legal. Could an officer provide a response to that? Also, in respect of Gaines Road and properties such as there, should they be able to park also within MF? So you have some notion of overlapping zones. So those are the points other people have raised with me. On to my own comments on this. Well, I mean, I've said this many times. We've been here many times, and I think you know roughly what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, which I think this whole process is a debacle. There's nothing democratic about it, nothing at all. People are not being given a choice here. A true choice is between the status quo and change, and that's the choice. That's not the choice anyone has, because in reality, with the extension of AVRA zones around, that the amount of displaced parking that there has been huge. If this area or the one we're going to talk about later was left out of the residents' parking scheme, it would be the only place it is, and that would result in cars coming from all around, parking there and never moving. Not putting a zone in is not an option, but let's not pretend it's democratic. In MD, the vote was 50 to 45. What if it had been the other way around? What if it had been 45 to 50 no? Would we have said no? Would you have said no? Well, think what it would have been like for the people living in that road, with miles around, residents parking all the way to the city centre, all the way up to the north, the only place outside of a zone. There would be nothing democratic about saying, well, you can be the place where all of the student cars and the works vans go. There's nothing fair about that. It's putting a loaded gun to people's heads. And I think, you don't really have a choice but to go ahead with this scheme. I mean, I do accept that under where we shouldn't have got here in this way, but the fact that we are here means that this needs to go through. But my heart goes out to the people in this room and the other people living in the Craneswater area, because they're the real victims of this. They're the victims of your policy. They're the ones who have been struggling to park down their streets because they've been suffering from chronic displacement brought in from the zones that you brought in. And I would like you, quite frankly, I think it would be much more honest and truthful for you to say, well, what we need to do now is impose residents' parking zones across the entire remainder of the area, whether people want them or not, because that is effectively what you're doing. No one's really going to get a choice. The only thing that would have in its favour is it would save people having to put up with a year of not being able to park down their street, because that's what everyone's going to experience until they give in and accept a zone. So in summary, I do ask you to pass this today. I also ask that you take immediate action on all the parts on the rest of Eastern and Craneswater, all of which are going to be affected. But I'm very concerned about the process here. I don't think it's done anyone any favours at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Councillor Symes.
I'm probably going to repeat some of the things that Councillor Stubbs has said, but I'm going to do it anyway. I feel very sorry for people sitting here because they have been forced into this situation, and it shouldn't have occurred in the way it has. It's been most unfair and particularly unkind to a lot of people who live in the smaller streets where parking is much more difficult. With the first schemes, we had 24 hours with 2 hours free parking and no return for 4 hours. The schemes now limit parking because they're hopeful that they will stop people parking long term, leaving cars for days at a time. The way it's been done is appalling, moving the misery around without considering finding more off-street parking or addressing student parking, works vans and lorries. None of these things have been addressed in this. It's just one size fits all. When we became the administration in 2014, we realised it needed a citywide solution, all or nothing at all. We took out the last two schemes that had been implemented, MB and MC, as they were the last straw that broke the camel's back, as after all permits were issued, there were 400 free spaces. We started work to ameliorate the situation, but as there were legal matters to resolve, it took a long time. We did compile a report on it, which also included a citywide referendum, but when the Lib Dems became the administration in 2018, they binned the report and reinstated the two zones without addressing the 400 free spaces. Then, as the displaced parking became intolerable in nearby streets, they started implementing one-off zones, and here we are now. There are now areas who had no problem clamouring for a resident zone as the displaced parking is gradually moved across their area. There are more zones in the pipeline, so eventually all areas will have one, but did you need to do it in this way? Couldn't they all have had one in one? Yes. If the TROs had been put in place but not implemented until the whole area was done, they could all have been implemented at one time. So please tell me that couldn't have happened. We're in the areas where it's 2 hours here and 1 hour there. There's problems with dropping off and picking up children from various places. That's also a concern. Business in Albert Road. The parking solution there, 4:30 to 6:30, suits the theatre very well, but it doesn't suit the businesses in Albert Road to include a cat clinic whose main surgery takes place between 4:30 and 6:30. So, I think it's very unfair to most of the residents of Portsmouth that you are in fact holding them to ransom and making them pay these fees simply because you couldn't be bothered to do a citywide scheme or to find a way that it didn't have to cause this misery. Thank you.
Kevin, do you want to come back to answer any of those questions, or would you rather do it in a written form at a later date? Okay. Just before you start, I want to say we did consider a citywide scheme, and I've spoken with Kevin about this. There are, at the moment, 40 residence parking zones. I think it's 40 in the city, and that's just less than half of the city. So let's assume that there are another 30 to 40 parking zones across the city. It has taken 3 officers, not full-time, 2 officers full-time equivalent, okay, 3 officers, but 2 of them full-time equivalent, to deal with 3 parking zones. Now, if you work it out, and I've worked, and it's not rocket science, if you have, let's say 39 zones to be done, you will end up needing between 20 and 26 additional officers to do it within 5 months, which is what it takes to do. Now, we have had difficulty. We advertised for additional officers. Nikki is the only totally fully qualified, or was the only totally fully qualified person, because you can't just parachute somebody in. You really need to have people who are qualified. You have to be qualified to deal with a TRO, and you have to know every street in the city because you have to be able to apply the rules accordingly. We can't find them. If we could find them, we would, but they just aren't out there. So it's wonderful having these tabloid headings about a citywide scheme. It would be brilliant if we could do it, and I would totally agree with it if it could be done, but it can't be. But you've also got a problem of not everybody across the city. If you did the whole city, not every area would want it. So what would you have? You'd have some areas which don't have it, and therefore you would have displacement exactly the same. There's no simple solution, Linda, none whatsoever, and I'm the first to admit that. We've tried everything, and that's the only thing that we can come up with. Anyway, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of quick points. I'm going to have to come back to Councillor Stubbs on the stats. One stat I do have with me is that in MD the ratio of permits to spaces is currently 1,640 permits and 1,659 spaces. So it's very, very close to capacity. In terms of picking up and dropping off children, you're allowed to do that in a residence parking zone outside of school. What you can't do, obviously, is linger and park for a long period of time. So that shouldn't be an issue. And Councillor Stubbs mentioned something about a resident questioning whether we should have done a formal survey, and this is the formal legal survey where we publish notices, so this is part of the legal process, and that has been followed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowsher.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got a few questions, if I can. Stop smiling at me, Mr. Turton. In 3.2, with the informal survey of the MF, which is effectively the total area, MF and MD, that you, if I understand it correctly, you originally surveyed the whole area and then decided to split them into two. You've got a response rate of 313 of 1,995 households. Now, in 4.3, you've got 1,249 households that was done under the TRO for MF. Sorry, MD. You've also got in the other report, same sort of paragraph, 961 properties were surveyed in the extension area. They don't actually add up to 1,995. There seems to be 215 extra. I just wondered where they actually came from.
I believe that's Waverley Road, because they were included in the survey of MD, so they weren't surveyed again. So in the consultation, they've been included again because the last decision meeting, we deferred a decision on them, so they've been included in the formal consultation.
So you've added them in, but it's not in the report. Okay. In the consultation process in 5, and perhaps I'm having a senior moment, as they say, you've got 175 people responded to the zone, 93 support, 69 objected. Over the page, 13 are unclear either way, so that makes your 175. Also got the statement 25 respondents did not provide an address. Do they not get included in the statistics then?
Sorry, yes, they do get included. All the comments are included in the report at the end. Where we've indicated that 83 support are from within the zone, 49 are from objections are from within the zone. We can't obviously indicate whether those 25 respondents are from within or outside, but all of their comments are included.
All their comments are included?
Yeah, so they're included in the 175, but we do a breakdown of where the responses have come from.
Right, but they're not in the statistics though, Nikki, are they?
I think the missing ones are the ones that aren't in support or against. So if you add those in, then it adds up to 175.
You've got 93 and 69, so 162, plus 13 is 175. So where you've got 175 people responded to the proposed MF zone, 93, 69 and 13 is your 175, but there's a further 25 that responded, which haven't been included as part of that 175, have they?
So in the brackets, we've got whether people have responded from inside or outside. We've got 83, 3, 49, 5, 8 and 2, and the 25 that are left over didn't tell us where they lived. So those in the brackets don't add up to 175.
No, I know, because 83 supported the proposal from within the zone and 3 supported it from outside the zone. 83 and 3 is 86 to me, it's not 93. I know I'm being pedantic, but the figures don't make sense.
No, so we've got 83 from inside, 3 from outside, and there's 25 that have indicated support and 25 that we don't know where they live.
You've added them in? But how?
Yeah,
but okay, I'm sorry, but you're adding them in one part and you're not adding them in the next part.
I think we're explaining why the figures in brackets don't add up to 175 because we don't know where those people live. So 175...
Wouldn't it have been better to have had the 25 respondents that did not provide an address and say whether they were in support or not? Because you don't do
I
that.
think it does,
Yeah.
but so if you look at the 93, it indicates support. So really, it's 83 from within the proposed zone, 3 from outside, and then the missing 7 are the ones
Yeah.
for whom they didn't provide their address.
So you've included them in the statistics.
So they're included in in this particular bullet point. They're included in the 93, but they're not included in the bits in the brackets. And I think your point is well made, that really probably what we should have done is said 83 from within, 3 from outside, and 7 didn't provide an address.
Yeah.
Because that would make it a lot
I sort
clearer.
of see what you're saying, but you're not showing the breakdown where that actually has come from. And actually, if you look at 93, 69, 13 and 25, that is not 175. So your opening statement in 5.2 is wrong anyway.
It is, isn't it? I think it is.
93, 69, 13 and 25. I made that 200.
No, because the 25 is within the 175. So what is missing? So the 93, 69 and 13 all add up to 175, right? What is, and so those 25 are actually included within those figures.
Right.
But where your point is exactly right is we haven't made it clear enough that in the bullet points you've got 93, which is 83 plus 3 plus 7, and we've missed, and that bit is where it's missing out. Do you see what I mean? Because
I guess the point that I'm making is that Councillor Stagg is being asked to make a decision on whether to implement a zone or not. And if we're having to sit here and explain the figures because they don't add up, then how is Councillor Stagg going to have the confidence to make a decision in the first place? Because she's going to be making a decision effectively on incorrect or unclear information. Sorry, that sounds like a call-in to me, but I won't threaten that one.
I think the figures do add up.
It's all right, Lynn, you can lift your chin off the desk.
I think the figures do add up. I do see what you're saying, that it's not particularly clear. And I think this is one of the many reasons why the deputations are represented in full in the report, because as we've spoken about before, I know I
appreciate what you're saying, Pam, but yes, and Graham probably as well, we do read through the representations that have that, because we've had the debate in the past where do you stick someone that says, I'm supportive of a parking zone, but I completely disagree with the timings, because in theory, they're supporting the principle, but they're completely disagreeing with the TRO. But we actually include them as being supportive, don't we? Or do we not?
Well, we've taken on board that feedback, and certainly are using the kind of unclear either way point, and also we're trying to explain our thinking in terms of how we have assessed those comments, but that is the reason why they are represented in full, for people to understand verbatim what people are saying.
Just in that point, we do. If someone says we fully support this, but we don't like the times, we class them as an objection. And we've actually had people write in and say, that's not what my husband meant, he wants it, but not, we'd like different times. So we've actually classed them as an objection, even though they said they fully support it.
Okay, I mean, it's a very convoluted explanation of the figures. I don't know whether I totally agree with it, because the maths should add up to me. It should be simplistic to say 175 people responded, and then you break it down, because, even as I said, in brackets, 83 plus 3 does not equal 93. I know I'm a politician, but even that's stretching it a bit, to be quite honest.
I think your point is well made, and we will ensure that it's more clear in future versions.
But Lynn's going to have to make a decision based on something that I'm still not convinced about, and unless Lynn is totally convinced about it, I'm really not certain, because it's effectively incorrect information. One of the other points I've got, and perhaps I'm being picky with the phraseology here, you talk about letters being delivered to every property, and you talk in terms of people responding. How do we know whether you've got, let's say, a household of 4 and they've got 4 vehicles and they're all objecting to it? Do we treat that as one objection, or do we treat that as 4 objections? And how do we actually know that they're all coming from the same property?
Anyone is entitled to respond to a public consultation, and anyone that does, the comments are all reproduced verbatim in the report. Occasionally, you will get 4 identical responses, and they are all represented within the report. So if you look through all of these, it's extremely rare that actually people say the same thing. But as I say, everyone's actually entitled to have their say.
Right, so you could get multiple responses from 1 or 2 properties, either for or against a parking zone, and we wouldn't necessarily know that they've all come from exactly the same property.
Yeah, sometimes it's obvious. Other times...
It's only by recognising the fact that the language is exactly
so they're
the same.
split out into a resident and which road they live in. So that's how they're set out. So each resident, the road they live in, and what they've said.
That's because we asked them to identify the road that they live in.
Yeah.
And
so
the number of the property?
No, under GDPR we can't publish that, but we have the information.
I'm not asking you what's published here, I get that. But if somebody from number 1 the High Street responds, and then you get more from number 1 the High Street, do you treat that as multiple support or objection, or do you treat that as just one because it's one property?
We report every single one. So whatever you see in here is what the responses we've had.
So they would be included. So, for example, 83 within the proposed zone, if 4 or 5 of them we knew came from exactly the same property, they would be within. All of them would be within that 83.
Yes.
So it could be potentially
The same way
misleading.
you get conflicting ones. So we know it's the same address. Someone will say we want the permit parking. Sometimes, often, husband and wife will say they don't, but they're all reported in here.
That would be where one spouse wants it because they're paying 30 quid and the other one doesn't because they're paying something more. But yeah, okay. All right, I'll let Graham have a go now. It's as clear as mud, I'm afraid.
Have you finished, Councillor Bosher?
I do have another question, but it's a bit more general, but I'll let
Okay.
Councillor Heaney have a go.
Councillor Heaney.
Thank you. I think actually that point about the figures that Simon was always, it would be a bit clearer to have the people who don't have address, whether they're for or against, because you have to sort of assume it or work it out and think, oh yes, it does add up if you add that, but I tell you, I may have a PhD in history, but I have a CSE grade 3 in maths. I was never very good at that, so actually having that explanation would be really, really helpful. I had a couple of questions about the motorhomes. Do we have any particular designated parking for motorhomes in the city anywhere?
Not specifically designated. The seafront has an overnight parking ban for motorhomes. There is a private campsite in Southsea where motorhomes can park.
So there's a private...
There's a private facility in Eastney, sorry.
In Eastney, oh right,
Yeah.
okay. Have we ever thought of making any provision to allow people to park motorhomes in certain parts of the city that are not necessarily residential, i.e., not right in front of people's houses for obvious reasons?
So a lot of people in Craneswater do mention motorhomes. Some of them do belong to residents.
Yes.
And I know. And a lot do park on the seafront, where they're obliged to pay the same as anyone else. I think we'd have to understand the scope of any problem and whether a designated area is likely to be useful.
Okay.
And the other point is if they're staying overnight, they're probably camping and cooking, and that brings in a lot of health and safety issues as well.
Right, okay. Right. Another question about figures, unfortunately. And if you go to paragraph 9.4 in the report on the MF scheme, which talks about the estimates that are used to think about car ownership in the city. And I'm going to refer to the other report because there is something in that as well which I want to refer to. If I can find the page. It's it's paragraph 9.5 in the MD report. And in fact, there's a sentence in there which I'm not sure quite makes sense. It says, talks about the census saying that the average occupancy in Portsmouth is 2.3 people per household. Therefore, according to these statistics, the number of cars within the zone should be in the region of 1,140, and that's for the MF zone. When you go to the report on the MD zone, it says the census says the average occupancy in Portsmouth is 2.3 per household. Therefore, according to these statistics, the number of cars within the zone should be in the region of 1,140. And yet they're two different zones. Well, it's more than a typo.
Won't be a moment.
And of course, the other thing relates. If you use the figures in the last sentence, which talks about the 2011 census and the 66.6% households owning a car, then it says that's 1.37 per household. That gives you, for MF, 1,711 cars, if you use that figure. For the MD zone, again, if my maths is correct, if you use the 1.37 per household and the number of households, it gives you 1,316. So the figures that are being used to give estimates of cars are a bit all over the place as far as I can see. I can't work out what these figures actually are.
But can I say that
Now,
those figures are totally wrong now anyway, because these are 2011.
But also saying the same number of vehicles are in X zone and in Y zone, and so it's not a proper calculation. So it's, I mean, I know we can't know how many vehicles are in a zone because we don't get enough responses to be able to do an accurate survey of the number of vehicles in there. So we never know how many vehicles are owned in a zone when we actually try to set it up. We don't know how many vehicles people own. So we do have a bit of a finger in the air and hope it's all right, sort of thing. Do we know how many parking spaces there are in the MF zone? Do we know how many parking spaces there are in the MF zone?
We can make an estimate, but I can't do it here, I'm afraid.
Ah, right. Because you've got spaces for MD and permits for MD, so I just wondered whether you'd actually done a calculation. Because surely when you actually decide on a zone, one of the calculations surely has to be how many spaces are likely to be in this zone. I mean, obviously, you know, an average, you can't do a detail, you have to work out an average. So that gives you a sense of how you are going to accommodate the needs of the residents with also other things. So without some idea of the number of spaces you've got, you are doing a bit of a finger in the air job here, aren't we, about whether it's going to work?
I think it comes down to the fact that this whole proposal was put forward and the recommendations are made based on what people have told us and the parking problems they have and whether or not they want a parking zone. The figures in the finance section are to help the finance team give an indication of how much this scheme is likely to cost. It's not the information that we base any proposals on.
The information is there. It's supposed to be telling us about car ownership and making some estimates of how we plan for car parking, surely. I mean, because otherwise they don't actually have, they're not finance figures, they're figures about the numbers of vehicles per household. And if you're putting a figure in the report about number of vehicles per household, it seems logical to say that, well, therefore we could apply that measure to the particular proposal we're looking at now. I can't see any illogicality in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. If we looked at how we would do a parking zone, we would probably look at those statistics. It's purely based on what people are telling us and whether they want restrictions or not. Those figures in the finance paragraphs, as it's aiming to work out how much income is likely to be generated in the first year. That's in 9.5. I think if we did parking zones a different way, we would be probably telling people that you can or can't have a parking zone based on the figures, whereas people who live there have a better idea of how the parking is used.
Well, yes, but people's experience is different in every area, and as we've heard today from our residents, some people have little problem, some people say there is a big problem, and you're making a decision on the basis that the people who tell you it's a big problem are the ones who are going to get priority in what we deal with it. I mean, it seems to me that I'm sort of discovering the way in which I'm still learning about this process after so many months about how this happens. is that what we're doing is we're not trying to look at this in an objective way and say, what can we actually do to solve the problem? We're doing what you said, yeah, we're responding to residents, but we're creating more problems for other residents, because one, we don't know how many vehicles are in there. We don't know what the displacement is going to be. We know it's going to happen. We haven't got a clue what it is. We know that. So we create knock-on consequences in adjacent areas, which then forces people in those adjacent areas to say, hang on a minute, this is a problem. And they come and say, can you solve our parking problem? And that's like, well, yes, we just created your parking problem for you, so now you're going to have to solve our parking problem for us. So we do this sort of continual sort of, and it's the point that really sort of people go, why are we doing this? Now, one of the points about the way we deal with zones, surely, and Councillor Stack talked about, we can't do the whole city because it's too big. And I understand that point, and you couldn't do the whole city for a whole host of reasons. But what you could do would be to take an estimate of looking at the geography of the zones and looking at what the potential for displacement, and say, well, actually, we need to have this zone bigger. We need to consult more widely, because if we do X scheme, it will have a knock-on effect on these people in this area, in area Y, and we ought to let them know that this is likely to happen, because then we can take a proper decision about whether we actually go ahead with this or not. And we need to be more objective about the way we do it. And it's all very well saying we're doing what the people want. We're doing what some of the people want, some of the time. And just to pick up on Councillor Winnington's point about turnouts and referenda, the point about these decisions, and once these decisions are made, that's it. You've got this forever.
No, that's not true.
I haven't seen a single residence parking scheme that has been turned over and abolished by this administration or by the administration since they were introduced, as far as I'm aware. And I haven't seen any. People have to end up having to live with them regardless. So they are permanent, or as long as permanent as can possibly be. Because I've not seen one turned over. So I think there is an important point there.
That's because people have when they've been reviewed and people have wanted to keep them, and that's why they haven't been and then been taken out. But there's we've done this with MD.
It doesn't avoid my point that once this is not a review that is this is a permanent. Once you've got it, you've got it. So that's why I think the turnout issues are an issue. I know you can't get everyone to turn out and vote for these things, but I think that does cause a bit of a problem. And I think that's there are obviously people who know the area slightly better than I do. I mean, I represent the area next door in a sense, so I'll probably want to say about the other scheme. But I'm just wondering what is the next area that's going to be put under pressure because of this parking scheme? What do you anticipate the next area that's going to be under pressure we're going to have to consult on?
According to the programme, unfortunately I don't have a map with me today, but the adjacent areas of MG, MH and MI are being surveyed now, and the survey forms make reference to the MF and MD extension, just to let people know that the decision's being made today and there's a link on those surveys. So that's the area between Goldsmith Avenue and the seafront.
Can I just say, it doesn't matter what we do, there will be displacement. It doesn't matter if you have very few or lots, because there are far more vehicles than there are spaces in the city. There are about 83,000 homes in the city, and at the last count, and I haven't got the most up-to-date figures, this is just for the end of 2018, there were just over 128,000 cars, just cars registered to homes in Portsmouth. That works out at just under 1.6 cars per household, per home, building, flat, house, whatever. Now, the majority, as you know, it's a terraced city of terraced houses. There is room, a majority for cases, there's only room for one vehicle outside each house. So we have got an excess of vehicles, and it doesn't matter what you do, unless you say, and I don't know that legally we can do it, we can say only one car per household. I don't know. That's the only thing you can do.
I had one more question actually, which was when we do the consultations with flats, some of the privately owned blocks are really difficult to get into. How do we ensure that people get the consultation forms? Because obviously the post office can get in, but can we get in, and how do we make sure they get their form?
We have the same company that deliver the City Council's flagship magazine, and they obviously try to get in any flats that they can. If they can't, there are communal areas that they are left in that I understand residents know to look at. Any problems that are reported to us, we deal with straight away. And we also do back check reports, so the distributors go back to random properties in each street and ask if they received a survey form.
Well, can I say I'm really surprised about that, because with something as important as this, a consultation about a major change to your area, that we rely on a private company that might or might not deliver to the blocks, or might not leave the things in a hallway. I have seen flagships left in flats, and it happens much more often than you would probably realise. And if we're doing that without consultations on something that's born of this, I think that is really bad, and we should think about doing something different, because it disenfranchises residents who will not know about it, will not have a chance to say, and I think that's really bad.
Can I add that on all the streets there are notices as well, so people will see those when they're parking. But no, I think.
Also, a heck of a lot of flats have got a trades bell, which you can get into before 12 o'clock. I mean, all the flats that I deliver to in...
That may well be true, but even when people can get into flats, and I know council blocks people can get into, the deliverers for flagship will sometimes not bother to go up the stairs and deliver them because they're too lazy to do it, and they leave them in a pile on the stairs. And that happens more often than you would like to think.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make was that it's not always impossible to get into flats. There are trades entrances. Have you... Oh, Councillor Bowsher.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stagg. I think I'd probably echo that. I mean, where I live, there's regularly loads and loads of flagships just dumped in bushes where they clearly can't be bothered to walk up some of the hill slopes, to be quite honest. And I'm not suggesting that would happen in this case, but do we actually sort of audit the deliverers to make sure this, or do we rely on them to audit themselves?
So I'm just really surprised. If people report this as a problem, then we deal with it. They've got no reason not to deliver them. They're being paid for it.
Sorry, but how can somebody report something that they haven't actually received in the first place, so therefore they don't know what they're reporting?
If you've got a lot of people in a block of flats, it only takes one person to see what. They're brightly coloured forms. The reason we don't put them in envelopes is a lot of people, if it's just address the envelope to the resident, they won't open them. So we do them really brightly coloured to stand out.
Are they in envelopes, or are they just...
No, that's what no, we don't, because you can't...
So you've got no way of knowing then that if somebody goes into a communal block of flats and puts 20 of these leaflets in the front, that number 1A isn't taking all 20 and filling out I support against all of them and sending them back, and that the others aren't getting it. You've got no way of knowing that.
We're just talking about surveys or the formal.
Well, either way. Because let's face it.
I think if we didn't get any replies from people in flats,
we have a three-stage process, and let's face it. If I'm guessing reasonably that if the informal survey, which is what we're talking about here, came back, and let's say, to use Councillor Stubbs' phrase in this example, 41% didn't want a scheme, and 41% did want a scheme, and 54% didn't want a scheme, we wouldn't actually be sitting here talking about this zone in the first place.
Yeah, if the figures were different, yeah, we wouldn't put forward a proposal.
You wouldn't put forward a proposal where the majority said we're not in favour of it. That's the point.
Yeah, that happened with the GB zone that was on the programme, yeah.
Okay. And I think the points that Councillor Heaney makes about the Director of Finance's comments need to be taken on board, because after all, traffic and transportation are hanging their budget on those sorts of comments as to what's actually going to happen. So if that information is incorrect or again misleading, then it's going to have a function on it. And Mr. Frost, I think it was pointing out about the value of the permits. Well, they're based on these figures in the first place. If there's a black hole in it, then they ain't going to go away. The price is going to have to go up to actually manage that. But coming back to the subject of motorhomes, because quite a few of the... Sorry, I'm just a question I've got.
No, I just want to come back on that about the finance. I mean, from my understanding, the finding out the information is to find out how much it's going to cost. Yes, to put in the scheme?
The finance comments here are talking about how much it's likely to cost to put in the scheme. The income is very, very difficult to estimate because we just don't have the information. So the error that is in the MD one, the calculation itself is correct. It's just the number of cars that in the region is the wrong figure. So MD should read 877. But the calculation is correct.
And as far as I'm aware, the Transport Department is not dependent on any money coming in from the residence parking zones for it to carry on. Any money, and it doesn't make very much, you should know this yourself, and Councillor Bosher, from being Cabinet Member. It was your party who introduced the £30 first permit in the first place, and that goes into the parking reserve, which legally has to be spent on transport, but it's not budgeted for because we can't budget for it because we don't know how much is coming in. Am I right?
Yep. I think we were the ones that also proposed to do away with the charge that you voted against, but hey-ho. On the subject of motorhomes, if a motorhome is registered to a residence address within the zone, are they entitled to a permit as well?
It depends on the weight of the vehicle. So vehicles are restricted by weight, and the residents have to have a vehicle registered to their address to be able to obtain a permit. We don't specify classes of permit. It goes by whether the vehicle is registered an address and the weight of it.
It's only because I think reading some of the comments that people have actually written in with, they obviously bring up the subject of vans, business vans and whatever, and if vans are registered to a property within the zone, then they're entitled to a permit anyway. So for those people that think by having a residence parking zone is going to clear the street of vans, it isn't necessarily the case. But with regards to motorhomes, which are effectively potentially a much larger vehicle, they're actually quite lightweight, a lot of them, so they could actually fall within the weight restriction, and they would be entitled to a permit as well. So where we're talking about areas close to seafront, if they're registered to a residence address, and there was one here that says they seem to be parked here for months, which would infer that they're probably residents potentially, it isn't necessarily going to do away with motorhomes either, is it?
No, I mean the zone isn't designed to penalise residents, so if any motorhomes turn up and are just staying in the area, they wouldn't be entitled to permits. But obviously residents, whatever vehicle they have, if they're eligible for a permit, then we're not designing a scheme to prevent them from getting permits.
Right, but for those people that think that it might do away with the motorhome that's parked outside their property, it ain't necessarily so, as the song goes.
But we are looking at limiting the length of vehicles. Yes? Kevin?
We have discussed.
Yeah.
We have discussed it. Yes.
That'll be interesting, because certainly some vans are about the same length as SUVs and stuff like that. In a lot of instances, that's probably going to be a difficult one. Can I just talk about enforcement? And this is sort of applicable to both, but I'll raise it now. Have the number of CEOs or traffic wardens, to use the common phrase, actually increased over the last sort of 18 months, the number we've actually got out on the streets at any one time?
Yes.
What's the change in figures?
There's at least two more. I'd have to check the figures. One of the things we're doing, though, is looking at the way in which they patrol and increasing their efficiency by re-looking at the routes they follow, where they go and what they do.
Right, so there's at least another two. Is that an extra two out on the roads at any one time, or is that just another two into the number that still work shifts?
Yeah, there's two into the shifts, yes, but we're looking at the shift pattern as well. We're currently out to add on part-time posts to work in the afternoon to cover the zones that apply in the afternoon.
Sorry, Kevin. So how many traffic wardens are out on the streets at any one time during the day? Is that a figure you
It
can
depends
give me?
on the time of day. We have 3 shift patterns.
Yeah.
And a day shift that works throughout the day in the middle.
Yeah.
So there's between 10 and 12 on a shift.
Yeah.
So they'll work the mornings, and then there'll be an afternoon shift. And then during the day, there's, in addition to the normal working day, there's 6 or 7 that work on the day shift.
So you could have 10 to 12 out on the streets of Portsmouth at any one time then, maximum, if I'm seeing that right?
More than that.
More than that.
If you've got a morning shift to 10 or
Yeah.
10 to 12,
Yeah.
then during the day you've got the day shift of 5 or 6. So in the peak time during the day, you can have 15 or 16.
15 or 16, and that figure's gone up in the last 18 months, 2 years, has it?
Yes.
By how much?
By at least 2 CEOs.
At least 2.
Yeah.
So we've added 2 CEOs and 5 or 6 parking zones then. Certainly MB, MC, these 2, MD and whatever. So we've added a half a dozen more zones and just 2 extra wardens on the street. Are we looking to recruit more? Because obviously residents in these zones are going to have an expectation that what they're paying for is actually going to be policed effectively. So I would imagine that there is a concentration of wardens in the zoned areas. Is that a reasonable statement?
Yes.
So on that basis...
That's why Kevin's just said there are 5 or 6 who do that shift which covers the parking restrictions.
Right, so on that basis then, where they're obviously weighted more to parking zones and looking at vehicles which aren't flagging up on the virtual system, what is the impact on CEOs in the rest of the city then where there aren't parking zones? Is there a lesser approach there?
We tend to send the CEOs where there are issues. So if we go to an area and there are lots of issues, then we'll go back there more frequently. So and the same with parking zones. So we're constantly monitoring it, but where we're getting the most contraventions, we'll respond to that. So it's hard to say. They don't necessarily do the same route every day. It's more intelligent than that. We're looking at where the problems are and sending them accordingly.
Right, okay.
Is that it? Right, okay. Right, I'll try and sum up and answer some of the questions. Councillor Bush has said he and Councillor Healy are opposition spokesperson. This has nothing to do with party politics. I make decisions on whatever the results are. And if people are against a scheme, I would say it doesn't go in. So I'm not averse at all to going against officers' recommendations, although in that case, that sort of situation, I'm sure the officers would not recommend that it would go ahead anyway. So this has got nothing to do with party politics at all. As I've already said, there are the problem is caused by too many people having too many vehicles, and we can't. With the best will in the world, we can't find any extra space. We have been to places like B&Q, Ocean Park, to see if they will allow vehicles to park there overnight. Some of them, B&Q, places like that, not interested at all. Some places have said they wouldn't be averse to it in the week, but on Saturdays and Sundays, that's when they get most of their customers, so they wouldn't want people there. We've spoken to schools, and it's the same sort of thing. They won't have, because of the potential danger of leaking petrol and so forth. So we've investigated lots of places where there are possibilities of having additional parking. But that still doesn't address the problem that the city has got, and that there's too many vehicles for the amount of parking space. And I think between 2011 and 2018, the number of registered vehicles had gone up from, I can't remember exactly, but something like 107,000 cars registered to homes in Portsmouth to 128,000. That is in a period of 7 years? That much increase. And if that keeps going on, the city is going to be gridlocked. And we have an air pollution problem, we have congestion problem, and I was reading the other day that congestion causes the country, I think it's £11.9 billion a year in lost income. And that's not for Portsmouth alone, I hasten to add, but it's, there is a significant proportion of that. So we have to address the problem of too many vehicles. And it's not just parking. Parking is part of a much bigger problem. And there is no easy way. There's no solution that fits everybody. I appreciate your problems with shift working, etc. But you'll have somebody else somewhere else who will think it's wonderful because that is the time that it affects them. We can't come up with one solution that fits all. We try and take the majority case. What else was I going to say? Somebody said about losing the value of your house goes down. In fact, I've been told but that in fact having a residence parking zone increases the value of your house, of your property. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's it. So it's not easy. I'm going purely on the fact that there are more people in favour than there are against, which is what I would normally do. If it was the other way around, I would go with that and say that I accept the officer's recommendations. But I would say that I think it needs to be reviewed. Maybe not an official review, but if people are having particular problems, I mean, for example, about the timing, we could do another TRO to change that if that is what people want. So people need to let us know. We haven't got the time, we haven't got the officers to do a full-scale review, but or the time either, with so many people on the list. But if there are problems, then they will be looked at, they'll be investigated, discussed, and amended if that is the right thing to do. So I'm happy to go ahead. Well, I'm not happy, but I can't see any other solution. I've spoken endlessly with Kevin about it. I mean, Kevin is a parking manager, was a parking manager in Guildford, exactly the same system used in Guildford as used here, and it's right across the country. Some places it's much more draconian than here. I mean, Brighton, for example, you only get one parking permit and that's it, and it's imposed. We don't impose. We do listen to residents, which perhaps is not the right way to go, because although it's democratic, I mean, people, if they, I mean, we did. Oh, somebody said about I think it was you, Councillor Heaney, said about not consulting other people. We did this in Copner when back in June or July, I can't remember, when the proposed HC zone was going in. So we did 2 exhibitions on a Saturday in Copner Methodist Church, and there were a couple who came up to me, husband and wife, and the wife said to me, we've got 4 cars, what are we supposed to do? And I said, well, have you got parking, off-road parking? And she said, no. I said, so where do you park the cars? She said, well, outside the house. I said, well, you've got a very big house? Well, no. So how many cars do you park outside your house? 1. So where did the other 3 go? And she said, well, elsewhere on the road. I said, taking up somebody else's parking space. My husband came up and he said, you're taking away my civil rights. And I said, why? And he said, because you're telling me I can only have 1 car. I said, no, I'm telling you there's only room for 1 car outside your house. And that is the basis on which I think can work. And that is that there isn't any more room. It's different in other cities, but Portsmouth is unique because it is such a compressed city, and it's a city of terraced houses. Very few people have got off-street parking. And of course, in my ward, a lot of people have got off-street parking, but they don't use it because they use it for storage. Their garages for storage. And I think if people did use their garages a bit more, we wouldn't have quite such a problem. But that's a different matter altogether. So there's no simple answer, and this is the best one that we can come up with. Councillor Bosher's idea and Councillor Symes of doing a whole city is just not feasible. If it could be, oh, sorry, my apologies.
It's just about to do that very thing.
Well, they've obviously got far more officers than we've got. We haven't been able to get any more. We've advertised and we had 2, one of whom then went to somewhere else, and we just can't get the officers who are fully qualified. We've trained 1 up, and that's it. So, good. Well, we'll contact them and see how they did it. Okay. But in the meantime, I'm happy to accept the officer's recommendations. Thank you. Right, we go on to. I did forget to say we did have some written. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I meant to do it at the beginning, and then something took my mind away from it. I've got there's 1 for, 2 against, and that was for there's just names but no addresses. Okay, so we go on to the next one, which is D extension. Yes. Kevin.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg. With MD item 4, it's a proposed extension to the MD zone. I draw your attention to paragraph 5.2, which states 111 people responded. Each one of those responses is listed at the back of the report. They're each individually numbered, and there are 111 of them. As with the previous report, each response was individually numbered, and there are 175 of those. So with MD, paragraph 5.2, 111 people responded. Our assessment is 74 of those were in favour, and 26 objected. So on that basis, we're recommending the implementation of the zone as advertised.
Thank you, Kevin. Where's my list of right? I've got some deputations, 4, I think. Yes, sorry. So we've got Councillor Winnington, who is 4, and Mr. Mike Lowry, and Craig Withy, and Councillor Stubbs. You want to do some more? So, would you all like to come to the table? So it's Mr. Lowry and Mr. Withy. Pardon? Oh, you just want the written one? Okay, I'll read that out then. Councillor Winnington, would you like to start?
I thought it'd be Mr. Lowry, member of the public first.
My apologies, Mr. Lowry, yes. Totally.
Good afternoon. Listening to the very eloquent deputations that have been made, I'm going to have to up the ante, I think, and watch what I say. There seems to be an awful lot of emphasis on figures, numbers, justifying the schemes that have been put forward by the council. Well, I think most of us know that you can prove anything you like with figures and statistics, really. You can bend them and shape them and do what you like. There are a number of residents down St. Ronan's Avenue where I live, some of which said, yes, I need a parking space, I'm voting for it, great. However, they hadn't really gone into it. They hadn't read it, they hadn't understood it. I think there was only one gentleman who had really gone into it, who was an ex-councillor. The majority of them were either apathetic and said, oh, the council will do what they like. Well, I'm not sure I run with that. However, certainly what came across was that those who voted for or against didn't really understand what they were voting for. So I do think that all these facts and figures and pieces of paper, I wonder how much value they've got in providing the information for a decision that's going to take an awful lot of money and also get people like us. We've got 4 cars in our house. We're going to sell one anyway to be responsible, but the thought of paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds every year, my son-in-law, me and my wife take the opinion, well, you'll have to come and get it. Not wanting to face that, there's other things that residents have said, well, they're thinking of moving into the countryside. And some have said, well, perhaps the councils want us to sell our houses, 5, 7-bed houses, and then they can turn them into HMOs and take an awful lot more council money. These are the types of things that are being said. However, I'm going to split my deputation into 2 parts. This is all based on speaking to other people. It's not necessarily just what I feel and how it affects my family. Certain points of view have come up. Families that have chosen to migrate or live in Southsea, they had expectations of a relaxed lifestyle, living near the sea, where children could be brought up, where traditional values are protected, and they're not going to get screwed. Now, living in fear of penalties, and this is something all of them said, living in fear of penalties, having to remember the times that they can park or can't park outside their road, the restrictions, the slightly aggressive nature of some of the parking wardens who go around with their stab vests, racing around in cars, jumping on them when they park on one of these pressure pad things in the road. All this type of thing creates a feeling of unease and unhappiness amongst residents who are living around here now. I wasn't sure who really proposed these schemes. You say that it's non-political. I had been told that in fact central governments were pushing for these schemes, or maybe they were just pushing for some sort of resolution. So, I'd like to know who to blame for it, really. I think there are some upwardly mobile mobile people who are likely to just sell up and move into the country. We can't all do that. The specific points are, there's no guarantee for anyone to access a parking space, particularly for workers who get home after 6:30 in the evening and find their spot taken. I think that's been covered very well, but it's an important issue. Low-income families, young folk working in cafes on limited means, as well as one lady who cleans, she's a school cleaner, who cleans a school very close to us. She's received 5 parking tickets very recently. She's a single mum, low wages, and she was close to tears over this. She says, well, what can I do, What shall I do? Give up my work? Now, it's this type of person that's paying heavily for it, and they can't answer back. I did try and get 2 or 3 people to come along and make a deputation to explain, how they're living in a little bedsit, not earning very much, and the council is sort of saying, oh, you can pay £30 for your first car, which is likely to rise, 150 for 2. I mean, we've got 4 cars at the moment, and we will sell 1 to be responsible. However, there's issues then of dropping the curb. We've been told by COLAS that we could pay our £60, but the council will, at the moment, not allow us to do that. Not allow us to drop the curbs and do away with our front garden, which I cherish very much. And there's another issue here, that the overcrowding in Portsmouth has, to a large extent, been brought about by planning consent for building flats that very often remain empty, and then eventually they are filled and people have cars. So this is a built problem. And of course the planning department, they're the ones who have been very progressive and wanting to put up these flats for people with cars, and therefore we have this problem. I'm very interested in the environment, and of course I'm the last person I think in the road, St. Rowans Avenue, with a garden. Now that's going to have to go. It's going to have some sort of hardcore put over it. And let's think about the flooding issues. When it rains, we have a lot of rain, and where's that water going to go? It's going to add substantially to the flooding in Southsea. But also it's the degeneration of our streetscapes. Beautiful places. Southsea has always been slightly run down ever since I was a boy. But however, double glazing and people dropping their curbs and doing away with their gardens because they need to. All this sort of thing really is sort of bringing the city, it's not exactly coming up. There is some good work done, but generally I can see that there aren't many artists necessarily, or people who are interested in the visual effect of the city who are speaking out. Conservation departments, where have they gone? This is all part and parcel of what's happening here. So really we're looking for people who live in the city, who understand the values of the people who want to live here, and they want to keep the place nice, and they're feeling threatened by the fact that if they got, say, 4 cars, how much are they going to have to pay? Have I gone over? I beg your pardon. But I think I can finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Withy, I will read out your deputation. Is that all right with you? Yeah, fine. Okay. I am Mr. W., a local resident here in Eastleigh and Craneswater and campaigner for the Labour Party. Parking has a huge effect on all of our lives, from not being able to find a space, having to work plans around it, to now having to find the money to pay for a permit, an unwanted extra cost for those on low incomes. This is a really important issue for us all. I fully agree, as we all do, that something must be done about the parking blight that our neighbourhood faces, especially issues around vehicles that are left unattended for long periods of time and commercial vehicles parked away from where their owners reside. However, what we are currently seeing is an enforced displacement of vehicles from other parking zones that have been recently implemented by the City Council into the area with no thought to the knock-on effects to surrounding streets. Desperate residents are now finding that zones are becoming a necessary measure given the situation we are now in, and in some cases are having no choice but to support the zones or face further misery and disruption. We must support these residents who feel so strongly in this issue, but also feel that they're having this problem forced upon them by the Council. My worry is that the incremental nature of how the zones are being brought in, enforcing these zones will simply displace the problem from here into other areas of Eastern Craneswater, leading to the stress and inconvenience of other residents that I represent. If previous zones had not been implemented on such an ad hoc basis, we would not be facing such a dire situation now. More thought needs to be given to the problem in the wider area, something which the other parties in the Council are refusing to take on board, preferring instead to kick the issue between them as a political football. I recently wrote to all residents affected by the proposed parking zones, and a common feeling among responses has been that the Liberal Democrats are implementing these blanket zones incrementally through stealth without a clear mandate to do so, while the Conservatives use this purely as a means to attack others in the Council with no clear plan on how to resolve the situation. Kicking the can down the road on parking needs to end now, and a citywide residents-led solution needs to be implemented. We need to move towards a resident-led parking scheme that improves the lives of all, stops the displacement of vehicles from one area to another, and works to tackle the climate emergency that the city now faces. Portsmouth is one of the most densely populated cities in the country, with some of the highest levels of air pollution. Given this, we should be a front-runner in the fight against climate change, starting right here in the city with our traffic and parking policies. Radical change needs to happen. Public transport links need to be improved and must become more convenient and more effective than using a car before people will consider this as an alternative. Until then, the problem of parking will continue to be a constant cause of stress to residents. More must be done by the Council to work with all residents on parking. We need to move towards a sustainable, greener, resident-led parking solution that improves the lives of all, stops the displacement of vehicles from one area to another, and works to tackle the ongoing climate emergency. Thank you. There's some things in there I totally agree with. Right, I think that's all the presidents, yes? Anybody, there's nobody else, was there? Right. Councillor Whittington.
I'll let Lou go first this time.
Councillor Stubbs.
Okay. Well, I certainly stand by everything I said on the previous item, but I want to add a few points. I'm not going to repeat myself. So firstly, on a couple of specifics. So again, I've had resident raise an issue with me over the last couple of days from Beatrice Road. Beatrice Road and Leopold Street are two streets which have been residents' parking zones for a long time and are in their own self-contained zone. And he's talking, actually he's not tying it into this because he didn't know about this proposal today, but he was telling me about, parking difficulties down there. And of course, those two roads are a tiny little island in a, he hasn't, basically if he can't park down his street or the neighbouring street, he can't park anywhere if this all goes through. So I would ask that some consideration be given for alternatives for them, perhaps, for an example, for allowing residents from there to park in MC. Also something, and I've been trying to get a bit more information on this, which I haven't done yet, so I might be barking up the wrong tree completely, but just for get a thought from you about what affects how this might tie in with transforming cities. So one of the transforming cities routes is along Albert Road. Now I don't know at the moment what is proposed down Albert Road, but and this is where I could easily be wrong. But if forced to guess, I would imagine it would be some form of either cycle or bike priority. In other words, you could be looking at losing parking base down there. If that happens, what is the alternative for parking in the Albert Road area, or is there not one? We've talked a bit about blocks of flats and about leaflets being delivered there. I've just done my own calculations on this. So in Eastern Craneswater Ward as a whole, I make it about 420 flats which are not accessible through trace buttons. So these are ones where there is no trace button, or the trace button is disabled, and then you have to get someone to let you in. And I make about half of that number, basically about 225 in one of these zones, actually largely in the other one in MF. But I wanted to mention that because it's not a tiny number. It's not as though it's just half a dozen flats here and there that you can't access without someone letting you in. It's a much larger number. And then the main thing I wanted to say is in this game of whack-a-mole that you're playing here with residents parking. Now, I was taking the opportunity between these two items to do a little bit of research. Now, I'm going to acknowledge up front, it's only just me on Google just now. This isn't fully so. But I found, you can only really search on things that have happened recently, because otherwise they just drop out of the things you can easily find. And Edinburgh in September and again in November, I was talking about residents parking in that city. Now, I don't know that city, and I'm assuming that Scotland's broadly the same as England on this. And they are doing 8 zones at once. So that's what they are surveying and working on. And even more starkly, from Monday the 24th of February, which is to say 3 days ago, the West Sussex Gazette reports that Chichester, or actually West Sussex County Council in Chichester, is looking at introducing 15 zones in one go, which will cover the entirety of the urban area of Chichester. And I followed that through onto the West Sussex County Council webpage, and I'm not an expert on Chichester or anything, but it did look like that's what it was. I mean, that's how it appears. So, they frankly, they can do it. Why can't we? And they are doing all of the TRO consultation, all of the consultation on this in one shot. I think that proves to me that this is something that can be done and should be done, because otherwise we're just left again, as I said before, with a cycle of displacement, a cycle of moving the misery around, with everyone taking their turn to have 1 year of not being able to park anywhere near where they live. I should have said, I do ask you to pass the scheme today.
Sorry, what was that again?
But I do ask you to pass this scheme today, because there really is no alternative, and you cannot leave this as an isolated island.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. On the TCF thing, the doyen of the TCF is Pam, who sort of leads it. Can you answer Councillor Stubbs'?
Yes and no.
TCF, by the way, for everybody, is Transforming Cities Fund, which you put in a bid for, massive bid.
Yeah, the Transforming Cities Fund bid is all about creating a significant step change in the public transport provision in Portsmouth, looking at ways in which we can deliver reliable bus journey times with significant journey time savings. So we are looking at reallocation of road space and ways in which we can ensure that buses are able to bypass areas of congestion and pinch points. And that bid was submitted to government in November, following a huge amount of work that was done in conjunction with the Isle of Wight Council and Hampshire County Council and our bus operator partners of First and Stagecoach. In terms of the specific schemes that are being put forward, we are looking at how we can integrate segregated cycle lanes on an east-west corridor, and Albert Roads has come up as part of that. We have a real problem with continuous east-west cycle routes in particular in the city, and we want to be able to provide a safe way for which people by which people can get across the city. The designs are very much in their infancy at the moment. The bid that was put in was for a strategic outline case rather than a final business case, so the designs were very preliminary at that stage, and so I can't really answer the specifics of your question, but certainly we recognise the need for continuous cycle lane provision within the city and are looking at options along Albert Road for what we could potentially do.
I mean, just to come back in, so I mean, I've read the bid as well, and of course the thing is, while it is quite general in some respects, is quite specific in others, because of course you've got to put in costings for it. So you put in about £5 million for Albert Road, Highland Road, which I take it to mean there will be some quite significant changes, which would I be right in thinking that would in all likelihood result in the loss of the parking along Albert Road, which is the only parking left available to customers for shops and businesses?
I can't answer that specifically. I don't have the information to hand, but certainly I think we are at a point where we collectively need to consider what kind of transport system we want in Portsmouth going forward. I think there are quite legitimate concerns over the comprehensive nature of our cycle and walking facilities, and particularly around the bus network as we have it at the moment, and whether or not we do want to really transform that to emphasise the importance of public and active travel. As with any proposal that we put forward, it will be subject to its own extensive consultation, both in terms of a general concept consultation, and then if that then goes forward, it will be based on a TRO consultation. So, as I say, designs are very, very much in their infancy at the moment, but we as a City Council are very keen to improve the provision for walking, cycling and public transport within Portsmouth.
Thank you, Pam. Matt.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg, and thank you again for the deputations written and in person. And I'd particularly like to welcome the recommendation that this goes ahead, but in particular the fact that we went out in this, or a second stage has gone out to for consultation on the back of what residents said in the first informal consultation stage, that they considered themselves in this area to have more in common with the parking issues of the other side of Waverley Road. That was of some discussion even before the MD parking zone was proposed as to whether it should include, you should have effectively the whole of MF or part of MF, or the MF area that was consulted on. And I think it really shows that it was a responsive consultation by the fact that the response to it, the informal consultation, said that we will actually want to be involved with the MD zone, and therefore having the extension I think makes a lot of sense. I must go back to a bit of anecdotal work here. So I've been campaigning in Eastern Craneswater for 11 years, and right back to 2009, so this was before MC, this was I think even before MD or MB, or that might have just come in. Before MD, only MA was in. And I remember going down Gaines Road, Allens Road, Welsh Road, Herbert Road, and Waverley Grove in particular, and people saying, I've got nowhere to park at all. If it wasn't for this programme going forward in the way it is, which is asking people in that systematic, rolling way, I would have asked that this area would have been done earlier, because there's always been parking problems there. And I think that goes for lots of places that are being asked about parking zones, that are being asked in MF, areas of that have been asked elsewhere in Southsea, and of course are being asked in other parts of the city where people have said they want parking zones. But once again, I have to commend the way that this is being done as a way that is sensible. In Chichester, I'm reliably informed that they do have some existing parking zones, but these 15 parking zones are being imposed, and that is something that has never been the case in Portsmouth. In Portsmouth, we have always done them on consent. They are only put in where people want them, and it is absolutely clear in the case of the MD extension that the majority of people who responded want to become part of that parking zone. And it is also the case that for both of these parking zones, or parking zone and parking extension, that the areas next door are being consulted now. This isn't 14 years of waiting, 14 years of being ignored. This is now. And this hasn't been the case in some parking zones even within the last 6 years, because some parking zones have been introduced in other parts of the city and the areas around them, including in Cosham, and areas around them were not consulted. This is a completely different way of doing things, but based on consent. And if you don't want a parking zone, as we saw with the GB extension next to Fratton Park, you don't get one. So I completely support this. I support the people of this area, of the MD extension, finally having their opportunity to have a parking zone, to finally have the relief from the parking issues they have had for 20 years, and it's done in a way that is fair and based on their consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Heaney.
The question I have about this is if this was the case, that this was being discussed when the MD zone was being thought about, it was fairly obvious that the boundary of Waverley Road was going to be an issue and the roads immediately to the east of that were going to be affected. So why wasn't this area included in the MD zone in the first place? Because that would surely have been logical and sensible.
Any road is going to be, any boundary road is going to be a problem. Can you answer that, Nikki? The reasons why we...
Yeah, the boundaries on the programme of consultation are always indicative, and we generally go down a main road, which in this case would have been Waverley Road. But I say that this proposal has been put forward based on the feedback from residents who felt that St Ronan's Road was a better boundary, and we've listened to that.
Well, whilst I hear that, Councillor Winnington said that the issue of whether this current area should be included was discussed while the MD zone was being thought about. So it's not a question of, well, okay, that was the best route. It was fairly obvious that was going to be a knock-on, and I'm curious about why a decision wasn't made actually to go with it, because it would surely have been the larger way. Why wait for people to be affected and then bring them in? It seems to me that there must have been some other reasons going on as to why it wasn't included in the first place.
Nikki?
I don't know who discussed it with, or, yeah. Yeah, well, it may have been, but obviously we had the programme of the boundaries, and that's what we're working to.
In just general informal discussion, it was brought up, and we said, well, whichever one you choose, do we choose St Ronan's, do we choose Waverley Road? It's one or other. It's going to be a problem because that cut-off point anywhere, because it's the same thing with places like Winter Road and so on, because people on one side of the road, and Campbell Road was another example, wasn't it, in C?
Would I be able to help just to clarify what it was? So the issue was that it was speculated, because the MD zone as it exists now was the MD zone that was put forward some years ago. And so the question was, do we keep that, is that kept as the same area of consultation, or should it be extended over to over the other side of Waverley Road? And it was decided just to go, in those informal discussions, just to go ahead and keep it where it was when MD was first put forward years ago. And so that was the basic just discussion.
Thank you, Matt.
Just another couple of quick points, really. I think the other thing is about the zones that, where we have zones that are 24-hour zone, we have some bordering those. They get their own forms of displacement, because people have told me from MD that people are parking in Marmion Road to avoid the 4:30 to 6:30 parking, and they're now complaining to me about problems in the roads around there because they have a 3-hour residence, a 3-hour non-permit waiting period, which obviously affects the shops. So we are, again, it's the, in a sense, you could see this is going to happen, but we don't seem to think through the consequences of all of these things. And just a final point about the civil enforcement officers. I did actually go out with them around about Christmas because I wanted to see what they had to do, because I mean, we're passing these parking zones, and we spent more than a couple of hours out looking at how zones are meter zones and residence zones. And actually I asked lots of questions. I expect the guy was probably really fed up with me by the end of the time. But he was absolutely professional. I mean, he really answered all my questions, and obviously some quite challenging, difficult questions I asked him. And got real admiration for the staff, and obviously they do a really good job. And I don't think I've seen any evidence of them being, anything other than helpful to members of the public. And I saw a couple of examples when I was there. I was actually standing a bit further away, and somebody came up and he was really good with this guy who had a query about something about having applied for his permit, I think, and it hadn't come through or something, and we sorted it all out. So I've certainly got admiration. They do have a challenging job to do. And I think the other thing about these schemes is we do rely on people being concerned about getting caught, because we do not have enough wardens to police the roads, because I know you can't do it in the time as I've done the round. So.
Councillor Bersher.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Well, it's always good to see a Labour activist attacking the Conservative Party and then actually agreeing with the Conservative position. But hey-ho, that's a new one on me. I actually come back to 5.2 and these figures again, and I'm not going to jump through them all the time, but we have the same sort of confusion around these, except we don't actually have anybody outside of the zone in this particular one. We got 74 indicate support the proposal, 69 from within the proposed zone. Do I assume that that's 5 against it, or is this another figure somewhere else?
The back of the report sets out with numbers exactly each, and there's 175 objections. Oh, sorry, 111.
Yeah.
And it breaks them into sections, so you can see the bottom bit of 5.2 says 10 respondents did not provide an address.
Yeah. Which you haven't included in the 111.
Yeah, no, it is included in the 111. So where we're breaking them down into whether they object or they don't object, it adds up to 111.
Right, so
we've
that's
broken
10
it down
within that 111.
Yeah,
right, okay.
As with the previous report, where the 25 was the missing figure.
I mean, I'm minded of time, and I'm not going to re-rehearse all the previous stuff. You'll be pleased to hear him. My concern is sometimes the way the data is presented can be misleading. And I think it needs to be very clear, because you've got to bear in mind this is a public document. It's going to sit on the council website or be available as a document that anybody can revisit and look at it. And they are going to look at the decision whichever cabinet member has made and look at some of these figures and say, I really can't see how they actually came to that decision. So whatever you decide to do, I think there needs to be clarity so that anybody, it's the Clapham omnibus test effectively, anybody can pick these up from historical things, look at the figures and say, that makes total sense. They may not necessarily agree with the decision, but they can see why the decision was reached in the way it actually was. And some of these that come forward don't seem to actually reflect that. You have to really pick and think and punch a calculator, and I think there needs to be a clarity in the way you go about doing it. It doesn't help that you've got 2 zones that have come here today where you've effectively done one informal consultation and then split it down the middle and moved it out, which I think is just adding potential confusion to the 2 scenarios, if you see what I'm saying. I understand why you've done it that way, but it doesn't help, because effectively you have to read the 2 reports in conjunction with each other. So I think if there is a takeaway from this, I think officers I'm probably looking at here, and I'm not trying to be overly critical, you need to think in terms of the fact that how we present the reports that we do, because somebody can go back, I mean I do, I'm probably the sad person here, and I imagine other politicians are, we go back through the records to look at previous reports and pick up on it, and I would imagine that any councillor in this room does exactly the same thing to make their arguments for or against something going forward. It needs to be incontrovertible in the way that we're doing it. But I guess my overriding concern, And Councillor Willington talked about they're only put in by consent in that respect. But actually, if you look at 5.2 and do a quick number crunch, you're effectively saying, because these 74 are people, aren't they? They're objections from individuals, effectively. That effectively 7% have indicated support for the proposals. So that's effectively 93% of the people in this area that either objected or didn't engage, whichever way you actually want to look at it. And I think that is a worrying thing. I mean, you're going to make the decision based on the fact that 74 is bigger than 26, and I get that. But to me, it is worrying. And we had a conversation earlier about how we actually get the engagement. But if there is 93% apathy, effectively, is that really putting in by consent? It's an interesting argument, and I understand the local election scenario, but I would argue that it is a worrying sign that we're looking to effectively turn people's lives upside down with parking zones in this respect, but only 7% of the people are actually making the decision in a particular area. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed as to how we can get a higher engagement. I mean, most of these that seem to come forward, the total response is usually somewhere between about 10 and 15, 16% anyway, which I think is very low. So any decision that's going to be put in by any cabinet member is going to be on a single figure percentage effectively in favour of the zone, and I don't think that's a position where any politician particularly wants to be. The other telling thing, and I think this demonstrates where the policy is wrong, is in 5.3, and it's the first bullet point. And it demonstrates everything that's wrong about the way we're actually going about doing this. I haven't looked at the previous report, but I would imagine the same statement is there, which is displacement from nearby parking zones. So we get a situation, we put a zone in, and then we move to the next one, which has already been indicated, because everybody there that probably didn't have much of a problem beforehand now has a serious problem because everybody is shunting their cars across the road. And you can see it all the time where it's actually happening and people are moving across the road. I'm minded about the, just digressing, about the one, I think it's GA, the top of Twyford Avenue. It was introduced maybe a year ago in that respect. And at the point I asked the question, was the Mountbatten Centre actually consulted with BH Live? No, they weren't. You can hardly use that car park at the Mountbatten Centre now. It is full up with vehicles, and it's quite clear in the winter time that they're not users of the Mountbatten Centre because the cars are thick with frost, which gives it away instantly. So we aren't addressing the necessaries, we're just bumping the problem into the next streets, and I think that's something that actually needs to look at. You've got a couple more T&T cabinet meetings booked in for right on top of Purda. I can put money down as to what you're likely to be considering at those and rushing through, but you know, I think the whole process of bit by bit by bit is wrong, and I've said that for a long time, in the fact that all you're doing is heaping the misery along to the next street and the next street and the next street. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Councillors' mailboxes are going to be filling up when these actually come in, when they're just outside the zones. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Can I just say that in a previous incarnation, when I was cabinet member before, I totally agreed. I said that the low percentage response was not good enough. So this is when Ken Elkin was parking manager. And I said, I think it should be 51%. 51% return, and then 51% of those in favour. Complete and utter failure. It just didn't work anywhere at all. There was not one single residence parking zone put in during those 2 years as a result of that, so we just abandoned it. Because the most response we got was 34%. Because a lot of people, it doesn't affect them too much because they don't necessarily go out at night. The only people who tend to be vociferous are those who've got several cars, who don't want it, and those who are desperate because they've only got one car and they've got nowhere to park. So you you're only covering a smallish number of people anyway. So, anyway, I think this is a very sensible one, and I'm glad we've gone back to it and changed it, because obviously it is better this way than the original plan. So I'm very pleased to accept Officer's recommendations. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's not an easy one. It's always contentious. Every single residence parking zone meeting is contentious like this. So. No, we don't have anything like that.